Hey guys, welcome. This is Jen Frost with Faith in Fabric. I am excited to be joining you as we create the Our Lady of Guadalupe quilt. Now, this video is going to be a little bit different than some of the others, so I want to talk through some of those points. First, this video is broken up into chapters, and you can access all of the chapters down below. Second, we're going to be making this quilt real time together. That means I'll be sharing all of the things that go well, all the things to watch out for, and even probably a couple mistakes that we're going to find as we cut some special fabrics and make this beautiful quilt. The third thing I wanted to share is because we are going to be making this quilt over the course of real time, you're going to be noticing some wardrobe changes. So sit back, pretend you're at the Oscars, and enjoy. So let's take a look at the quilt. You'll see the quilt here actually works with any fabrics, but the quilt itself was designed to work with several different fabrics, all themed around Our Lady of Guadalupe. Now this is meant to be a fussy cut quilt because I don't know about you, but I'm really feeling some fussy cutting lately after all the paper piecing we've been doing. So we will be doing this more as a traditional piecing quilt. There's no paper in this one, don't worry. But you will want to go ahead and pick up the fabrics. So there's a link to the fabrics down below. The amounts you'll need are in the quilt pattern itself. There's also a link to the quilt pattern below so you can take a look at that. So we're going to head over to the cutting table and we're going to take a look at all the different fabrics we'll be using. And then we're going to start talking about how to cut them. Let's talk about the fabrics we'll be using. The first fabric we're going to be using is this beautiful Our Lady of Guadalupe fabric. So you'll see she's been hand drawn on here, surrounded by some beautiful Mexican tile style designs. And we're going to be doing a lot of fussy cutting. So she's going to actually appear as the center block in that quilt. I'll pop the image over here for you one more time. She's going to appear on here 25 times in the center of the block. And you'll see when we cut the block is actually going to be cut to look a lot like this. Now we will be adding color to some of these corners to dress it up a little bit, but you'll see her image is going to appear just perfectly in the center of the block. And what I really like about this is because these fabrics were custom made for the quilt, the fussy cutting is going to be really easy because the measurements are already built into the fabric itself. The second, third, and fourth fabric we'll be using are inspired by Our Lady's design and her colors. So you'll see we have two sets of stars. You know, these are inspired to be like the stars that are all surrounding her as well as what's in her mantle. So the same blue with the yellow stars that's in her mantle is the same blue with the yellow stars here. And then this is just a reverse of that. So you'll have the same yellow, the same blue, and then shrunk down. So the stars appear at a much smaller scale. Again, we want the fabrics to work together but not be identical. So she's gonna look so good with those. The third one that's going to work with Mary here is this red with the flowers and the gold. And that's the same that's in her dress. So again, this is just a small shrunk down version in her dress. This is that pattern much larger. So we'll be making 25 blocks using combinations with this as the center and these as the exterior trim. The next fabric, or the last fabric we'll be working with rather, is this gorgeous tile. We'll be cutting this in a variety of shapes here, really two main shapes that are going to appear throughout the quilt itself. So depending on how we cut it and where we cut it, that's going to show where in the quilt this fabric will end up. Let's get started cutting our tile fabric. The first thing to remember is we'll be making 16 of one cut and 8 of another cut. So the first thing you want to do is get your fabric and you want to look at each end where the selvage appears. So I've got my fabric folded in half lengthwise, and you'll see one end of my fabric has these red tile marks that have some space. The other side of my fabric has the red tile marks that are cut in half. You can see that difference here. Now this does matter, so you want to make sure when you start cutting that you're cutting your first set of tiles, the 8 tiles, from the side where the red is cut in half. You don't want to use this one because we'll be needing this one in a bit. So I'm going to flip mine over, open it up here, and we're going to get started trimming. Now I started making my first cut a little earlier, so mine already has one trim line through it, but we're going to keep cutting it together. So these blocks are all going to get cut at 8.5 inches by 8.5 inches, and that's because they're going to finish at an 8-inch by an 8-inch block. So here you go. So you'll see again, we're starting our cuts for those 8 tile blocks by using the edge of the panel where your red is cut. Now your panel should look a lot like mine. They all print quite similarly, where you'll have, you know, red tiles that are cut and red ones that aren't. I know I keep saying that, but make sure you guys start on the side for cutting where your tiles are cut in half. All right, let's talk about making those first cuts. So the distance between the center of each of your blocks is going to be 8.5 inches. And you'll see if we measure here, that comes right up to my 8.5 inch mark down here, which is perfect. So you're going to measure from the center of your block here to the center of your block here and cut 8.5 inches. Now you can almost bypass the measuring, which is really nice on this quilt. To make your first cut, you want to go ahead and you can just actually cut right through the center of those flower lines. Now make sure your fabric is smooth, but you'll be able to go right through the center of each of those flowers, which makes cutting super simple for this. So you see, I'm just cutting right through the center, and I've made now a whole panel where I've got my little red tiles cut in the center part here. So I'm gonna come back over, we'll just trim out that extra selvage edge there, and we'll keep trimming here, okay? So now you can come and you'll see your blocks should be just like mine. They should also measure 8.5 inches from center to center here. You'll see again, from here to here is 8.5 inches. So again, you can come and you can cut center to center on each of these blocks. Made this nice and easy for you, so not a lot of measuring on this quilt. You know, that said, you still want to make sure you're squaring it up. So you'll see, even though I'm going from center to center, I'm going to make sure my lines are square here. The tile is going to repeat regardless of whether you're 100% dead on in the center of your little square or not. So you don't have to worry about that. Now you can go ahead and you can save all your scrap pieces. Actually, I'm going to put a link up here to a great tutorial on how to use scrap pieces to make a great back for your quilt. But definitely don't throw these out. You can save all these, you know, trim them up and just make a gorgeous back for your quilt. That's the thing with fussy cutting, is you are going to end up with quite a few scraps. So you can just keep coming through. You're going to trim center to center. Again, making all of these beautiful little 8-inch, finishing 8-inch by 8-inch blocks, 8.5 inch with that allowance on there. Okay, so once your first set of blocks are cut, you'll see here's the first ones we created. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, and we need 8 of these. So we're gonna go ahead and we're gonna trim just like we did. Come here, cut this row off, and you're gonna trim up 4 more of these tile blocks until you end up with 8 total blocks looking just like this. Now that we've cut our first set of 8 blocks with kind of more of the simple design in the middle, or the 4-part design in the middle, we're now going to be cutting our blocks so that the red medallion is in the middle, and that's this guy here. So again, I'm going to show you some points that you can use to help you with your cutting. From the little green flower dot, the flower in this middle, to the little green dot of the middle of this flower, you have exactly 8.5 inches, and you'll see that here. So I'm going from 8.5 to 8.5 right down here. Scoot that up a little bit so you can see. And so you can use this as a very easy measurement, in the sense that, and you'll see we're still cutting from that same side that we were working on. You can put your ruler here, and you can just come straight across, again, cutting through the center of each one of those flowers. Now you, again, make sure your fabric is nice and straight as you cut, but this makes for a nice, easy cutting. And you'll see you're also going to be left with a really pretty strip here that you can use on the back of your quilt. Again, even though we're fussy cutting, it's nice to be able to save some of these beautiful fabrics and reuse them. So if you look at your quilt, again, this is that medallion that we're going to be centering. So if we cut here, you can imagine there's already a cut line here. This is going to be centered by these flowers. So remember, these are the 4x flowers that we had in the center of our block last time. That was the center. Now we're actually going to be using that as the cut line. So we're actually going to be getting 2 completely different tile blocks that'll work well together by just using this one fabric. Okay, so you'll see again, if we line up here, the center of one yellow to the center of the other yellow is 8.5 inches. You will want to probably trim your fabric up on one side. It's probably going to be a lot like mine, where you're going to have, you know, I mean, I've got, gosh, it's like 1/8 of an inch off. But I do want to trim that up just to make sure that my fabrics are centered. You know, again, because we're going for that tile feel in this quilt, we want to make sure things are centered. once you have all of your tile blocks cut, that's the tile blocks that we just got out of this fabric, you're going to be left with an end-to-end piece. So we've got one end, we've got the other end here of about, I don't know, probably about 20 inches or so, roughly. Now what's great is you can take this and you can use this on the back of your quilt. If you've screwed up on any of those cuts, you should have enough left here to be able to do one more round of either. And that's why we started cutting from the side we cut on. You'll see if you've messed up on your red tile blocks, you have one more row of red tile. If you've messed up on your the 4x block of tile, you can still pull a cut from right here. So that's why it was so important in the beginning for us to make sure we started at that one end of the fabric. Okay, so we will now move on to the next section of our cutting here. That's going to be our second chapter, and we are going to look at how we are going to cut Our Lady Guadalupe out of the next fabric. The next cut we're going to be making in terms of our fussy cutting is going to be on the Our Lady Guadalupe fabric itself. So you'll see if you actually look at this fabric, again, just like the other one, this fabric is designed to make the cutting super easy for you. So when you come through, you're actually going to be cutting from the center of each one of these tiles to cut out your Our Lady Guadalupe block. So it's literally that easy. I'm going to head over to the cutting table and do it in fast motion because it's super simple. And we will meet up at the end to see how all of our little blocks are turning out. Okay, so you should have 25 of this lovely little lady all cut out. Now what I love about this block, you guys, is how perfect this fabric works for fussy cutting. It was literally designed to do just that. And you'll see while we're actually going to, in your pattern, end up kind of cutting off these corners to use the fabric on the corner to bring in more of that solid color to contrast against the tiles. What's super, super cool about these is if you weren't making this quilt or you just wanted to use this fabric solo or however you wanted to do it, this fabric is already cut to have an amazing repeating pattern going all the way around it. So, you know, you think about if you wanted to deviate from this quilt or you had extras of these and you wanted to make a second quilt, you know, how perfect would it look with that blue, that dark blue going all the way around, or the red going all the way around where it would pick up this red, you know, as a border block. So this fabric is meant to be versatile. It's not meant obviously just for this quilt pattern, but there's a lot of different things you can do with this block because of the way it was designed. So I'm gonna let you go for a while now, a while in your time. Of course, in video time, we'll speed it up, but we're gonna reconnect now again once we have our whole quilt top pieced. This is the end of the fussy cutting section. From now, you could just go into your pattern. You're gonna follow the basic cutting directions, basic assembly directions. It's super straightforward from here. And then we'll meet up again once you have all your blocks cut to talk about a couple different ways that you can assemble your pieces together. Talk to you soon. So as you can see, I am thick into sewing all of these blocks, and I wanted to share an easy tip with you on how to piece these quickly without having to do a lot of measuring. Now, there's two different ways you can do this. The first way you can find the very dead center of your Our Lady Guadalupe block is you can fold her in half on each of the points. You know, you fold her this way, if you pinch, and then you fold this way and you pinch, you're going to end up with knowing exactly where your center point is. And then you can use your center point as you're putting all your pieces on to make sure you're on those lines. A faster way, now not quite as accurate, but if you're pretty good at piecing that I prefer to do it, is like you'll see here. So I have my red blocks are all sewn, and now I'm putting on the yellow on this one. And so what I did is I lined it up with the edges, and then I make sure, I'm gonna show this real close here so you can see it. I make sure that there's a perfect square right there. And if there's a perfect square right there, I know that they are lined up this distance and this distance, pretty much where they need to be. Now, if they looked like this, you'll see that's not a perfect square. That means that one of my pieces is too shifted, or maybe both of them are too shifted over. So there's two different ways that you can try to take a look at your blocks. You know, again, short of kind of doing the fold and the fold to find the dead center. But that's another good tip too, is if you are a little bit newer, I would actually recommend folding it like a square, folding Our Lady like a square, and then finding her center that way, because then you'll have the straight lines going up and down that you can try to work from a little bit just as additional guides. So if you're, like I said, if you're pretty comfortable piecing, I find for me this make a square technique in the middle where they overlap is going to work just fine. Let's get back to sewing. Let's talk about squaring up our blocks. Now you'll see here, I've made a little cheat sheet here with just some washi tape. I'll put a link to some washi tape below, but I like to just use this as a simple guide so I'm not constantly measuring. But you want to make sure that your blocks fit within your guide. Now this guide is based on the measurements in the pattern, which you'll need to have on hand so you can read through it. But you'll see what this will do is, now that all my blocks are assembled, you'll see if I put them in my little grid, they're measuring, you know, pretty good on this side. I might be a little short here, but this side is longer. You'll see I'm extending over the lines on my cutting mat. So what you want to do is you want to go through and just trim up your blocks a little bit. You'll see patterns called as squaring them off. And you want to do exactly that. You want to make sure your blocks are square. Now, sometimes depending on how you sew, you may find that one side versus the other side has more than 1/4 of an inch from the point to the edge. So if you find, like on this side, you know, so you could see I'm a little bit over here and I'm a little bit over here, you're going to try to adjust your block to fit best, and then you can trim using that 1/4 inch as a guide. So you'll see right here, while I'm lining this up, you know, to make it fit within my grid line, I'm also looking at this little mark here, this corner mark, and I'm making sure I don't cut less than 1/4 of an inch. Because if I do that, what that means is when I take this over to my machine and I sew, I'm actually going to end up sewing into the red on this side, and on this side I'll end up with more than 1/4 inch, because again, you're not losing any width. So those two little tips of cutting and then making sure that you're leaving that 1/4 of an inch on each side will really help your blocks to look their best when you put them through your machine. So let's talk a little bit about rotating your tiles. There's a lot of patterns that you can make within your quilt, and I want to share some of those with you now. So you hopefully have made all of your little tiny blocks with Our Lady Guadalupe in the center. This is actually the very center block, and that's the one we're going to be starting with. Now, I designed these fabrics in this quilt reminiscent of those beautiful tiles that you see throughout Mexico. And I wanted to share with you some of the rotations and how those rotations of the blocks are going to make the quilt itself feel even more like a tile. So we're going to spend some time today starting with this very center block, and we're going to be playing with these blocks, because depending on how you rotate them, it's going to completely change the look and feel of your quilt. So let's head over to the cutting table and take a bird's eye view. So here's that lovely little Our Lady block. And these are all of our tile blocks. Now these are the tiles with the medallion in the center, and that's what we're going to be putting around Our Lady. Now I want to share with you first, just take a look at these, and so we can get a feel for how this block is cut. If you remember from the large piece of fabric, this was actually a repeating pattern, kind of like that, and we ended up cutting through these small little square flowers to end up with this. So now if you think about how you want to place this around Our Lady, you have really 4 options, and they really are 4, and I'm going to show you why. So, well, 3. So you've got it where you can set it up, where you can have the blue flowers kind of touching her. And what that would do is create a blue flower all the way around. And I'm going to show you that here. So you'll see here, this is how this pattern would slowly start to look if you put it with the blue flowers around her. Now already you can see I've created a sub pattern here. with the way that the blocks are set up, you'll notice that the orange and the yellow are on opposing corners, which means you have to decide now if you put your blue flower blocks pointing in, do you want the corners to be the same? Like you'll see here, I've made this corner the blue blocks and this corner the yellow blocks, or do you want your blue block to always be consistent? In which case, if you turn this over, you'll see now you have yellow, orange, yellow, orange, yellow, orange. Do you see how that pattern changed? Just by flipping this block over. Now, if you don't, you'll end up with a pattern that looks like this, where you'll have your orange blocks tied in one corner and your yellow blocks tied in the other, as opposed to how we just looked to making it where it's going to be opposing in each. Okay, do you see? So that's like your first choice, first two choices. The next way you can play with these blocks would be to use the little orange blocks on the inside. Okay, so we'll turn these. You'll see, I'm just gonna turn them in. And now you'll see you have your little orange blocks all making a little bit more of a square pattern around her. And again, when you do that, you want to think about what flowers do you want on the outside. Now you'll see here, I have put the little orange blocks facing in, and I know this is probably the one you can see best, but the orange flowers, the blue orange flowers, those are at the base. You can see here, those are at the base. So that's going to make that orange flower be the secondary pattern that you're going to pick up. Now again, you can flip it if you wanted to. You can take this one, for example. You'll see here's where the orange flower is at the base. You can flip it over. Again, you are still keeping consistent with that little square pattern going around her, but now you're putting your orange flowers at the base here and your yellow flowers at the base here. Orange flowers at the base here and yellow flowers at the base here. So there's going to be a lot of play that you're going to have to think about before you start putting these blocks down. And I want to point this out because what I don't want you to do is just to quickly come and put your medallion blocks down and you kind of throw them in there, and then by the time you're done quilting, you're like, oh my gosh, I didn't realize that I've kind of got some of the big flowers here and I've got little ones here. There really are a lot of sub patterns built into these fabrics. Okay, let's talk a little bit about this block here. So this is the same in the sense that you're going to want to think how you want to use this block. So this is your second tile. Again, this is the one where the medallion was actually the one that was cut, creating those main flowers now as the center. Now this one also has play in the sense that this is going to be more of on the border. So this is like your second layer out on your quilt. You'll need to think about how you want this to position. Will you position your block the same all throughout the quilt? So throughout your entire quilt, will you always have your orange flowers on the horizontal and your big blue flowers on the vertical? Or will you turn this based on where they are on the quilt? So, you know, for example, will your blue flower always be the flower that is closest pointing towards the center of your quilt? So as these blocks go throughout your quilt, will this block continue to rotate? You know, you want to, again, think about that. Think about what kind of secondary pattern you want to create. Because when you think about tiles, especially the Mexican tiles that we're trying to replicate here, there's a lot of secondary patterns that are in those, and they all seem to just replicate out and radiate from the center. So those are some things you want to think about as you start to put your quilt together. Once you have your first row done, I want to talk to you about how to press this, because there's a pressing technique that's going to make this much easier for you in the long run when it comes time to joining your rows up. When you have your first row stitched, actually let's say your first two rows, and it comes time to joining them, you're going to want to press the seams towards the tile blocks. That's going to do two things. What that's going to do is it's going to reduce the bulk, because if I hold this up, you'll see this block has a lot more bulk on it than this one does. So if I take all my seams and I press away from the Our Lady Guadalupe block, if I press towards the tile block, and then you just keep going through the quilt. So on this one, you'll see this one would actually fold up. By pressing them this way, you're going to reduce that bulk. It's also going to make it so your seams are going to nest with each other. So when it comes time to adding your rows together, because the row that's directly above this one is going to have an Our Lady Guadalupe block right here, your seams on the back of this will be pressed in, the seams on the Our Lady of Guadalupe block will be pressed out, and those seams will nest perfectly. And that's going to give you that real sharp join spot right here. So let's press some of these blocks and start putting our rows together. And there you go. 7 rows later, you'll have your quilt top all done and ready to go. So you'll see that it comes together with that really unique tile style, unless you've chosen to do something else with yours. You know, it's funny, as I was sewing this, I was thinking how perfect these blocks are, since they're just, you know, an 8-inch block, to substitute our Jessie tree blocks, some of them into here, and then use this pattern in other ways. This is the perfect pattern to be putting, you know, 8-inch blocks in, or to be fussy cutting with. So I definitely see myself using this quilt pattern itself over and over and over again. I did want to show you real quick what I meant by nesting those seams on the back. So you'll see here, because this seam was pressed this way, over here to my left, and this one came to my right, when it came time to join those two seams, I'll bring it real close, you could see they just fit perfectly together. So that's that benefit that we were talking about earlier. Just wanted to show you how that turns out. So I hope you enjoy your quilt top. I hope you've enjoyed sewing this with me. I have loved putting this together. We'll be putting another video together on how we actually quilt this. You know, there's just so many ideas I have, and I'm really excited to share them with you. So enjoy the rest of your afternoon, and we'll talk to you soon. Take care.